And this is my grandmother Hutchins. She was Josephine Ames, and this is her mother, who was Ella Staples Ames.
So on the far left
is my grandmother,
and on the far right
is my great-grandmother. And in the middle is my father Guy, and below him is his sister Mildred, who was the baby of the family. She was 13 years younger than he was. That's my mother, Maud Vivian Soapwest Hutchins, and my father Guy, and his little sister Mildred. See the long hair? Usually it was in braids, but it wasn't there. That's my grandmother Hutchins. I had that made so I could see what she really looked like, because all I had was a small photograph. But I think she was a beautiful woman. But she only lived to be 47. I don't know what the problem was. Mom said she probably had cancer, but who knows. And that's her husband, my grandfather, Ivo Leroy Hutchins. He lived to be 79, but he never remarried. And that, my grandmother Hutchins' parents, John Ames and Ella Staples Ames. He was a Civil War veteran who was in Andersonville, I believe, prison. And when he came out, he was never well again. But he was a postmaster for a while in Ireland, and he taught school for a while. He did many things. All right, that's my great-grandfather Hutchins, the father of Ivo. His name was Edwin. He was a twin. Edwin, his twin brother was Edward. And he married, I wish I had a picture of his wife, my great-grandmother Hutchins, but I haven't. She was a woman from Deer Isle, Robbins, I can't remember, from Deer Isle. There's my mother and her sister-in-law, Mildred.
Mm.
That's my father and his sister Mildred with a cat. I don't know what cat that was. And there, Guy and Nat. What always amused most of us are the dresses the little boys wore. But they wore them to be quite old, only 3 or 4 years old. And Guy was a year and a half older than Nat, because he was born in January 97. Uncle Nat was born in July 98. And then, back in 1910, came the surprise, Mildred. That's my father again. I don't think he really wanted these pictures taken.
That's a great little outfit.
But isn't it adorable? He still has a skirt, but he has a jacket with a, and that they used to call those berthas, those big collars, and
Oh yeah.
berthas, and his little hat, little cap. Oh, so this is Uncle Nat on the left, my grandmother Hutchins in the middle, my father on the right, and Mildred in the middle in front of her mother, and my great-grandmother Hutchins, great-grandmother Ames on the right, and that was a friend of the family. I don't know.
The man on the front left.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've been told his name, but I don't remember because I didn't know him. Yeah, and this is, might say, a family photo of the boys. My father, Uncle Nat, and Mildred. She was in the carriage, just a little one. She's still alive, incidentally. She and Horace used to come down and visit my mother. She's 93 now, and that's my father and Uncle Nat. You see, my father didn't wear a tie. Uncle Nat had a tie. My father's more casual. That one, John Ames, he was my father's cousin. His father was Fred Ames, who was the baby brother of my grandmother Hutchins. Yeah, there they are again. But that is my father and Uncle Nat. My father on the left, Uncle Nat on the right. And that is John Ames, their cousin in the middle. I think that was the house that burned. It's where Milton Horace built the house down the Castine Road. Oh, yes, that's my father's draft card. He went in the end of 1918, just before the war ended. So he had training in Fort Massachusetts, that fort, but he never did go overseas. And that's my mother down at the shore. Hey, she's smiling. Ed should have seen that picture.
That's right. You should have. She's got a big smile there.
Look at all the driftwood. That makes beautiful fire in the fireplace.
Oh, right. It makes colors, doesn't
Yes,
it?
it does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is our shore down here?
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. She just made me. I don't remember that picture at all. See? My father at the same place. Yeah, down at the shore. And same. Of course, he was usually smiling. That is, as he grew older, he was smiling. When he was a boy, when he grew older. See, the shore is so different from what it is now.
Yeah, it does.
Because the gravel bed has been taken out and it's been reseeded so that the bank doesn't come down to the shore the way it did then. But look at all that driftwood. Think of the beautiful fire I could have in my fireplace again. And this was when they were married. April 19th, 1918. So that was soon after that. You know, it's interesting to see these people without glasses. Because after they have them a few years, you remember them only that way. And this was their 25th anniversary picture. That would have been 1943. Yeah, that was before they were married. They must have been out in the boat somewhere because I think I have another picture of them with pond lilies. So I think they went out rowing at the loch. Hey, she's actually smiling too.
She is.
Yeah, there's the one with the pond
that
lilies.
pond lilies?
Yeah. Oh, we used to go out at pond lilies too. Look, suspenders. I don't remember he ever wore suspenders, but he didn't there. And a long dress. Imagine getting into a canoe or a boat with a long dress. Ugh. There I am. I'm, what, 6 months old, 4 months old? Wasn't that a beautiful baby?
You were? Absolutely. Absolutely.
I had that high chair until something happened to it. I guess it just wore out. Oh, and this is the year I graduated from on school, the 8th grade. And that dress, oh, I love that dress. We all the girls wore white dresses and white shoes. Well, my grandfather Hutchins happened to be home for a week or so, and I wanted a white dress. So we went over town, and he bought the dress I wanted, which amazed me because he was not an affectionate person, so you never knew how he felt. But apparently he did care about it, because nothing to it. Just went over, that's what you want, that's what you get. So I got it. I was not happy, I loved that dress. And that was my grandfather Hutchins' house. He bought it so that when he retired, he would have a place to come because his house had burned. That's my father down. Now, I don't know where the fence is, but they were always walking around. There were always fences, so there were cattle on either side of the road here. And sometimes, when there was scarcity of water, the people on this side were allowed to bring their cattle over on our side because we had a spring where we could water their cattle. Now look, this is the big old barn, and there's another barn there. And all that behind was cleared out because it was pasture land. And this was a big old rock I used to love to play on. But you see, it's all grown up now. You'd never know that rock was a huge boulder. But that's my father. Look at all his hair. This barn, my grandfather had built because he had cattle. He had 12 cows and sold milk to the Hancock County Creamery at that time. And this was the old barn that was there when they bought the house. But looks as though and that's my father again, making hay, probably down in the field there. Looks as though it might be across the river there. So all that field was straight, and the whole thing was cut for hay because they had so many cattle. And then Josephine Brewster Hutchins with her baby brother Charles Gilbert Hutchins sitting on the step of the old house up here. And that was, I probably was 3 years old. I was probably 3.5, and he was 6 months, something like that. And that blanket quilt that I have around my door was one that my great-grandmother, I think, made for me. And see how little girls wore pinafores then over their dresses. I had on a dress, and I had a white pinafore apron-like thing we always wore. And I wasn't allowed to go barefoot either, my feet. And that's in front of the same house. That's my Aunt Mildred, my father's baby sister, and my brother and I. And those, oh, I love those shoes. Those shoes were patent leather, I think, but
Mm-hmm.
they were high, and they had straps going over the instep and up the ankle. It had to be buttoned with a button hook. Yeah, that was the, see the long curls, didn't I? Oh, I had to sit on the stool every morning while my grandmother brushed my hair and made curls in it. And when she was gone, so that my mother had to do it, my grandmother could say, "Oh, you've done it all wrong. You're left-handed." Then I just didn't care if they didn't do it at all, but they did. I was probably 4 or 5 then. And that was a dress my mother or grandmother made. You see, they embroidered across the front. They did. I always felt I was one of the best dressed people because they made things, and they were both good seamstresses. My grandmother especially, and they liked to embroider, so that they decorate whatever I had a decoration on it of some sort. In fact, when I went to normal school, my mother had made a suit for me of an old suit that Aunt Rose had given her, and they were, the jacket, as she made it, had moth holes down the front because it was a woolen suit, so she embroidered around it. The girls thought it was, normal school thought it was beautiful. Oh, in fact, the normal school girls were always borrowing my clothes. They liked them. And they all had store-bought things where I had made over, and
16.
everywhere. I was 10 and Buddy was 7, and I had just picked strawberries for Walter Brewster and then $12.31. Mrs. Brewster said, "Oh, isn't that wonderful for a little girl?" Well, I was happy with it. I bought that dress. It was a dress with a jacket, and I had enough to buy a box camera, a pink box camera. So I was quite happy. Yeah, that's my brother with his Eagle Scout picture. He was the first Eagle Scout that Bucksport Troop had after they were reorganized. And that's my brother who's on leave from the Marine Corps. He was a member of the first Marine Corps, came home on leave, and that was the last time I saw him. But he was shipped overseas. He was, uh, I don't remember the first uh, invasion that he was in, but he was wounded and sent back to Australia. And we have a picture somewhere of Eleanor Roosevelt talking to him because she came to visit the troops in Australia. And he met a girl there whom he liked very much. Mom got letters from her for quite a while after we got divorced. But I think that he would have brought her home, or he might have stayed because Fred said that the Australian government was offering land to soldiers if they'd stay. So he might have stayed, but he didn't. And that's my brother when he graduated from high school. He didn't know what he wanted to do, and so for a while he jobbed around, and he spent one winter in Camden with my mother's cousin's widow. Then he joined the Marines. I'm trying to remember when he joined the Marines because he must have joined the Marines in 1941. He graduated in 1940, so he must have graduated 1941 and went to Paris Island for basic training. And he was sent to California and they were shipped overseas from there. That's my cousin Ruth. She and I didn't see eye to eye back in those days. She was an only child, and she Well, she was 7 years younger than I, for one thing. That made a difference, too. Now we're best friends. That's up on the hill in the house. The house on the hill at, in front of the shed. With I don't know what the vine was. It certainly filled it up, didn't it? And that's
7-3.
Uncle Nat. And I've wondered where that is because he's got a hen, so it looks as though it was down where the old house was, but I don't know where that could be. He was, I don't know why he had a hen in his house. Yes, when he was a little boy. I don't know where that could be either. That's somebody's hayrack. That's Dorrance Ruth's son, Uncle Nat's grandson. When he was in the service, oh, well, the Navy. I don't remember for how long, but I don't think he wasn't. See, he's about Charlie's age. So you see, he wasn't in any of the Korean or he just was in the service for a while. And he's involved with the fire department in Bucksport now. And that's
7-7.
Ruth. And I don't know if she graduated from high school or not, but that would have been about the time that she would have. She was kind of a pretty girl.
Mm-hmm.
That's David. David Soper. His, he's the son of my Aunt Mildred and my cousin Horace. He's He is the fourth son. They had 4 sons, and he was the last one. Patty, their daughter Patty was the youngest child, but he was next to the youngest.
8-2.
And that's Patty, the baby. Patricia. She lives up here and has a beautiful home. My aunt lives in the trailer behind her, so Patty can look after her without having to live with her. I think they're both happy with the arrangement. My Aunt Mildred and my cousin Horace, back when they were, well, he was going into service. He has a uniform on. And you see, he had an old car behind him. He never wanted a new car because he'd rather have an old one he could work on. He loved working on engines. He was pretty good at it, too. And that's my Aunt Mildred with their 2 oldest children. Charlie is sitting down, and the second one was Edwin. And I think she probably was pregnant with Jimmy because there was only about a year's difference between them. That was Charlie. He was the cutest little baby. I, I enjoyed him. He was a twin also, but the other twin was stillborn. Mm-hmm. It had been choked by the car before they could be born. And that was interesting because both Richard and Horace were brothers. Horace was this baby's father, and Richard had their second child was a twin. Brent was a twin, and his twin was born the same way. Not born. He was born, but he was born dead because the car. Wow. Charlie, Horace Mill's oldest child, the one that was a twin, and he lives over on Castine Road. In fact, his grandson Foster was the one who shingled my roof, oh. And that's Edward, Charlie's younger brother. So there's Charlie and Edwin. And Edwin has a factory of his own called Elscott. He makes parts for electrical parts of some sort, and he's done very well. And this is Jimmy, the third son. He was a teacher, and now he lives in Florida. His wife was a smart woman. Everywhere they went, she'd start a business, a craft business, knitting business. So they've done well too. Oh, that's my great grandmother's sofa. My mother always felt bad because just as she snapped the picture, my grandmother put her hand over her face to move her hair, and because Mom didn't realize that was all she got was a hand over the face. She was Caroline Eldridge, and my great grandfather saw her at a dance and said, that's for me. So that was the end of that. And that's my great-grandfather. That wasn't what he looked like when he said that's for me. But he did. He was a man who learned to be a veterinarian without college education. He just knew how to treat animals. My mother said that people would come from miles around to get him to go take care of their cattle or their horses. It was big animals that he understood. And of he played the drum too. I don't know what else he did, but he was old there. That must have been just before he died. And this is Caroline, in her older age. She lived to be 97, I think. But the last of it, I wouldn't want to live like that. She was in bedridden most of the time. She couldn't hear. She couldn't see. It was terrible. My mother would go up there to see her. She'd take me along. And Uncle Print, who was taking care of her, would try to make her understand who I was, that I was Vivian's child, and she just couldn't understand. And I'd stand on one foot and the other. Be glad when he stopped trying to. But she she was quite a woman. My mother said she wasn't much of a pastry cook, but she could cook game, wild game, so that you just enjoyed it. And of course, in those days they did hunt frequently for their meat. Oh, and that's my grandmother's sofa. And that's at the foot of the driveway looking towards the woods on the opposite side of the road. I used to think that Fairyland had to be like that. I dreamed I was in Fairyland and I was up in the woods with the snow all around, but I wasn't cold. It was just beautiful. And that was at the foot of the. She hated to have her picture taken too, because it showed her wrinkles. She didn't like show, and she really didn't have many wrinkles. She was a round-faced person, but she was very vain. Oh, that was Charles Wesley Soper. But each one of my great grandparents' children was given a nickname for a real name. So since he didn't like being called Charlie or any official, he spelled his name Chas period. So they thought it was Charles. And we were the younger children that had been named after him were called Charles. But I thought that was he was Charlie, Aunt Mag was Maggie, uh, Uncle Bob was Bob. Prentice was the only one who had a real name, Uncle Print. I called him Uncle Print, but his name's Prentice. And that's the one I know that had a real name. I think that's too bad. That was in front of the shed that is no more up there, the old house. He, he was splitting his wood and getting ready to bring into the house. You see, that was window. And he had a beard. He had a beard because he didn't like the formation of his mouth. His teeth protruded, I think my mother said. So he always wore a beard and mustache to cover that up. Talk about vain people. Well, there he is again. But you see, he has a mustache.
I like his hairstyle.
And that is she, my grandmother, Harriet Curtis Norman Soper. Round face and all. That's how she could breathe. The way she must have had on a tight corset to bring her waistline in like that. And that was pretty dressed too.
Mm-hmm.
That was Uncle Pearl, their oldest child, Pearl Hilton Soper, and he was born up to the Falls. After their marriage, they lived up to the Falls with the grandparents for a while till they bought this place. They bought the place in 1889, the spring of 1889. Moved down here with him. Then they had two more children afterwards. And that's the old house, the way it was before Johnny took the dormer window off, and I think they changed the front door too. But he changed the L too. There was a front door on the L, but he took that off and just had the back door on the L, which was enough. The L had a summer kitchen, and after my grandparents lived there, they made the kitchen into a living room, sort of. And out in the in the L, there was an opening behind the chimney that they called the binnacle. And the kitchen stove chimney pipe went up and over and through into that binnacle to the chimney which was behind it. Well, we we loved that binnacle because my mother or my grandmother would make bread, put it up there, it smelled so good.
Mm.
It was because it was warm. The pipe was there and it was warm. They could take, and could always store things there.
Mm.
I was sorry Johnny took that out, but it just made sense. They didn't use an old wood stove, so the L was completely different from what it was when I was a child. Oh, that's Uncle Pearl. I don't know. He was a young man, and you see his hair, and he was bald, quite young, so he was really young man. Oh, and that's Richard and Horace. See, Richard was being very jaunty, and
Is he on the right?
yes, that's Francis' husband, and there's Horace, my Aunt Mildred's husband. They were different boys. Richard was one that did the drinking, and Horace did the playing. And that's Uncle Frank down by the lilac bush up here at the old house. I, he was a jaunty one too. His his hat was always in a jaunty ankle. That's my mother. She's almost smiling, but I don't know where she was. She has an apron on. They always wore aprons in those days, which is. She used to get me. Why don't you wear an apron? Well, Mom, these old clothes. Why do I need an apron? Oh well. And you see, they wore hats then because they had to be careful of their skin. I think we all should wear hats to be careful of our skin, but I never did. And that's Richard and Horace too. They're up at the house above where they lived. This is Mrs. Hubbard's house. They were. I was trying to think. Oh, the Forsyths lived in one end, and Bill was a boy I thought was handsome. He had the most beautiful blue eyes and dark black curly hair. He couldn't see me, but I could see him. And that's Aunt Mary and Uncle Pearl, their 50th wedding anniversary. They're the parents of Richard and Horace. And this is Frances Soper. She was Aunt Eva's daughter before Aunt Eva married Uncle Frank, and Uncle Frank adopted her. So she was brought up as a Soper, as his daughter, even though she was another man's daughter. And that's why she and Richard could marry, because they were not genetically related. They were simply by, what would you say, numerically related. And so she never did change her name. She was always a Soper, except because Aunt Eva and Uncle Frank were married when she was about 5, I think. I think I was 3 and she was 5. She's just 2 years older than I am. And because I remember, I used to try to catch up with her. I wanted to be as old as Frances was, because Frances could do all the things I couldn't do. And then this is a high school graduation, and that June, after she graduated from, well, it was Eastern Maine Conference Seminary at that time, she and Richard got married, and they went over and live up in the house where she lives now. And then this is Richard when he was little. He was the first child that Uncle Pearl and Aunt Mary had, and apparently she wasn't ready to have children, so she was willing to let my grandmother have him all the time, or as much of the time as she would. In fact, as Richard grew older and could come by himself, Uncle Pearl would go to work sometime, drop him off at the head of the road, and Richard would come walk down, because he spent so much time down there with his grandparents. And this is Aunt Mary, and I've wondered where that house is, because it doesn't look like our old house, and I don't know where it is, but that's Aunt Mary. Must have been about the time she and Uncle Pearl were married, because she looks quite young. And she was Mary Gray, and they lived out in they lived out to Duck Cove up beyond there. Oh, This is Uncle Pearl and Uncle Frank when they were little. They must have been, what, I think there was 3 years between us, like 2 and 4, or maybe, say, 2 and 5 probably. Because the Uncle Frank was still in skirts, but Uncle Pearl had pants. So he must have been about 5, and Uncle Frank about 2. Weren't they cute?
Yeah.
And that's Uncle Pearl. He was a Johnny. That's taken by the lilac bush up in the old house. So many pictures we have are taken down by that lilac bush because it made such a good background. And at that time, that must have been about the time he was married because he looked shiny. He looked as though there might be some hair on the edge of that hat. Because he was bald from the time I knew him. I remember him anyway, he was bald. And that's Richard. That's Uncle Pearl, not Mary's oldest son. That was taken when he graduated from Eastern Maine Conference Seminary. The high school, which we have now, was not in being when they went to high school. It was Eastern Maine Conference Seminary, run by the Methodists. And that is little Dick. That is Francis and Richard's oldest son, Richard Stanley Soper Jr. Look at that grin. Look at the ears. He was a cute little fellow. They only had the 2 boys, Dick and Brent. And there were, what, 9 years between them? So they were more like neighbors than brothers because they were so different. And he grew up, he lives over in Verona now with his wife, grew up to be an entomologist, got his doctorate, and worked for the USDA and went all over the world setting up experimental labs and checking things. Now he's retired and lives there. So one little old Olin boy got around. We have another Olin boy who's around too. He's in California with his daughter.
That's true.
This is Brent Soper. He was a twin that Francis and Richard had. And the twin was born dead, but Brent lived, and he's been a joy to Francis ever since because he lived here in town, so he could, when she needed something, he was there. He has lived in town and been available to help her whenever she needed it. In fact, he married a girl in town who last year developed cancer and died, so now he's alone. But he bought a mobile home in the park in Florida, so he and Francis go to Florida each year, which is good. Then this is Dick. Yeah, I thought this was Dick when he was a baby. He was a beautiful child, big, fat, happy, blonde little fellow. Of course, he grew up to, in fact, he got through high school just the way Charlie did. But his mother wanted him to go to university, so she went up and took him up, got them to accept him. In his sophomore year, he hit the right course. A professor became interested in him, and from then on, he was top student and became, well, got his doctorate eventually from Cornell in entomology, or whatever anyway, he got his doctorate and he went all over the world setting up laboratories and doing and checking on them, and there he is. He also was an Eagle Scout. But he was an Eagle Scout here in Orland after, well, he was before Johnny, but I don't remember what he was, but he and Alvin Gross worked together and both became Eagle Scouts at the same time. Oh, and this is Horace. This is those 2 boys' uncle, and also my cousin. Horace was Uncle Pearl and Aunt Mary's second son, who married my father's baby sister, my Aunt Mildred. So figure that one out. She was 3 years older than he, but what was age? They had, I think they had 7 children, but they raised 5. The first One was Charlie, who was a twin, and that twin didn't die. Then later on she had excuse me, a little girl who was born so crippled that the doctor didn't let her live at all. And I think that was wise. So, but she did have 5 healthy living children, which she brought up. They had 4 boys and 1 girl. Their last effort, Patty, was a girl. And she's been a blessing to her mother, taking care of her. And there, David and Patty, they were the 2 youngest of the Soper children. He must have been a scout too. And that's David again. He was an imp, but a good imp. He married a Jewish girl, and they had 1 daughter, Melissa, who just recently got married. And his first wife, Melissa's mother, had, I won't say she was crazy, but she was something wrong with her mind, so that she was very unstable. And I don't know where she is now, but they finally got a divorce. And he has I don't know if he's married or not, but he has another woman, anyway. And he lives out here now. He was in Connecticut. He became a meat cutter, so he could always get a job as a meat cutter. And he lived in Connecticut. Now he's back here driving a truck, I think. And that is Lucille. That's Charlie's wife. She was Lucille Laud. And she's had emotional problems too, but as long as she takes her medication, she's stable. But go off it and she's off and off it. They had quite a time before they found out what was wrong, what they could do to help her. She was in the state hospital for a while, and I took her up a few times to have shock treatments. Believe me, those were horrible, I guess, from what she said. But finally, they found the medication that was necessary for her, and as long as she takes it, she's fine. But she still talks a lot. And she's an artist. She's the one who painted that picture that we have in there, of Auckland. She gives lessons, art lessons. And Foster is her son. Foster, who shingled my roof. Oh, that's Milne Horace with the 3 oldest children. Charlie, Edwin, and James, up in front of the old house. Charlie's the middle. He's the biggest one. And this would be Edwin, the second one.
On the left.
And Jimmy, the third one.
On the right.
Right, in front of Mildred, yeah. And that's Charlie, the oldest son, who he graduated from high school, went down to Southern Maine Technical Vocational, and I think he took machinery, something with machines anyway. He worked in the mill for years, and he excuse me, he now has a shop. He's retired now. Has a shop down behind his house where he can build a boat or do whatever he wants to. And this is Jimmy, their 3rd son, with his family. The Jimmy's wife's name is Marion. She was Marion Stubbs. And they have 2 sons. Paul is the larger one, and Brian is a smaller one. Paul is, they both went to Maine Maritime Academy, and Paul is with a company, he ships out, he goes across the Gulf of Mexico, but I don't know just where I think it's Alabama, but I'm not sure. He ships from there. And Brian is involved with fishing down in Cundy's Harbor. He married, and the girl, I guess, didn't want to leave home, so he went there. And these, our Uncle Pearl's 4 grandsons, they were his pallbearers when he died. You see, this is David.
On the left.
And this is James, Edwin, and Charles.
Okay.
And they were Milne Horace's 4 children. And that's Patty. That must have been one of her school pictures. She was a little blonde, and she's been her mother's caretaker, which is good. That's why we have girls, you know.
that why?
Yep. See, you're going to be your father's caretaker.
That'd be all right with me.
I told him that's what would happen. He said, well, I don't mind.
I don't mind.
Oh, and this is Foster. Oh, he was the cutest little thing. He grew up to be a character. He has never married. I don't know why. But he has his grandparents, his Lord grandparents' house in Bucksport. And he works out of there. But he's planning to build down the Castine Road. He says his mother and father are going to give him a piece of land, and he'll build down there and use his father's shop, because it's a huge shop, plenty of room for anything. And he can't have a shop over to Bucksport because of the zoning.
Mm.
So and I wish you could hear him talk. You know, you think of old people as being opinionated, set in their ways. He's old beyond his years. This is the way things should be, and that's all. Now this is Jimmy. Jimmy is their third son, Horace Mildred's third son. And he's the one who has married Marion. And they live in Pensacola, Florida now. He's retired from teaching. And she always had wherever she went, she had a business, a knitting business, because she could knit anything beautifully. And so she would always make money wherever they went. And he was principal usually of school. But I guess they're both retired now, live in Pensacola. And this is Edwin. Edwin is married and has one son, Scott. But he he has a factory, L. Scott, in Ellsworth, out in the just outside of Ellsworth. They make parts for one of the electrical companies. So he's done well too. And that's Foster again. See that little impish smile? He was the cutest little thing. Foster is Charlie's son, Charlie Sopa's son, Mildred and Horace's grandson. And that's Cheryl. Cheryl is Mildred and Horace's granddaughter. She's Charlie's child, his youngest child. He had the two boys and then he had a girl. And she was it. And she and her husband have the house that Mil and Horace built when they were young. And they have added onto it an equal amount of space. Mm-hmm. And that's Charlie now. That's an old picture of Charlie Soper. That's her father. That's another one of those school pictures. Oh, that's Ginny Davis. Now, Ginny, how'd you get in there? Yeah. That was one of those school pictures. See, her father was Uncle Frank, who was my mother's brother. And her mother was Aunt Eva, who was Frances' mother. Uncle Frank married her after she divorced her first husband. So Uncle Frank just had two daughters. He had Ginny, then later, when Aunt Eva was 46, they had Maurice.
Wow.
Of course, you know how scandals are. It wasn't his child, it was somebody else's. Who knows? What cares? But Maurice does not live around here. And she has, well, I guess Ginny and Frances have some contact with her, but not much. She lives in Oklahoma, I think it is. And that's Frances. That was taken when they lived in Natick, Massachusetts. Uncle Frank worked on a big farm up there. That was a fun place to visit, because we could go up to the barns and play with all the hay and whatever. There's Ginny again. Ginny was 9 years younger than Frances, so sometimes we had to have a tag along behind us when we didn't want to, because she was a lot younger. You know? But she grew up to be quite a woman. Oh, and this is Aunt Eva, Frances' mother, Ginny's mother, and that's little Dick, Frances' oldest son, Aunt Eva's grandson. They were, she was selling poppies for the American Legion. She was a great Legionnaire. Uncle Frank was a Legionnaire. She was whatever the Lady Legionnaires are. And that's Francis again. I think that was another one taken in Massachusetts when they were there, because we got one every year. But oh, and that's Uncle Frank's house up in the village. He sold the place up here to my parents and bought that place in the village. It was one of the old buck houses. And Aunt Eva had plenty of room to take in pregnant women, so she was a midwife. And now that house has been moved back so that instead of facing the road this way, it faces it at an angle. Whoever bought it built a new foundation and renovated it completely. But it was a beautiful old house. And I loved the attic in that house. It was a big, huge attic that you could really play in. But in the next house below, it was there were two buck houses. The next house below is what Cindy Wentworth always called the gold house, because her father painted it yellow. And originally it had a big pipe organ in it. But I guess it was still there, but nobody played it. And I guess it needed renovation, so I don't know what's ever become of it now. But that's Uncle Frank in World War I. When he went to France and was wounded, and he suffered the rest of his life. And that is right down here. That's my grandfather, Soper, and Uncle Frank. See, it's all cleared off. You could see the water from here at that time. They must have been when the potato fields down there, because it looks as though he might have had a bag of potatoes or something carrying over his shoulder, maybe to plant or whatever.
And that's your grandfather on the left-hand side.
Mm-hmm. And Uncle Frank on the right. Uncle Frank was a farmer. Uncle Pearl would have nothing to do with farming. He was a carpenter, and he was a good carpenter too. And he even took up blacksmithing once, but not farming. That was not his big forte. And that's Uncle Frank and Ginny up in Massachusetts. And she was born there. And when my grandmother and I went up to visit, she was 6 months old, I guess. Of course, I was 8 at the time, and I loved to hold her. No, I was 7, because she was 6 when I was born. I know I was 6 when she was born. And I loved to hold her and rock her. And Aunt Eva had a blanket on the floor so that she could lie on the floor and play around. Well, one time I had been holding her and I was going to put her on the floor. My grandmother had a fit. She was so sure I was going to drop her. No. I'm not going to drop her, Mammy. No. So I didn't drop her either. I put her on the floor.
Yeah.
But she was cute. That was Uncle Frank and Ginny in Natick, Massachusetts, where they lived while he was working on the Hopewell farm. It was a huge farm belonging to some wealthy person who didn't live there but owned it, and I don't remember what they produced. I know they had cattle, so probably it was a milk farm, but I don't know. Oh, that must be Uncle Frank with his horse. He was a lover of horses and animals, and I don't know which horse that was. My mother would have told you a name for it, but I don't remember the horse's name. There's Uncle Frank down by the lilac bush. I told you they always had their pictures taken by the lilac bush. They must have been taken about the same time Uncle Pearl's was, because Uncle Pearl was by the lilac bush, and his too. And that's Maurice, the youngest Soper girl, youngest of the 3, Frances, Ginny, and Maurice. She is a beautiful girl. She's a beautiful woman. As she was the last time I saw her. I haven't seen her for 20 years, I guess. She's a grandmother now. She married a man who was in the service, so they traveled a lot. He was some kind of an officer, so they've done well. Oh, and that's Ginny outside of the what was the high school back in, when did I graduated in '38, and she was 43, I think, 43 or 44. So that's where she was. And that's her daughter Jane Eliza. And she's a girl who's had a hard life and a good life. Her first marriage was to a man who she thought needed her care and sympathy, and she could help him. You should never marry for that reason. She has two sons, two older sons, Preston and Curtis. Preston's in California now, San Diego, and Curtis is here, but he's going to the University of Maine, I believe. I know he is. Then she finally, after he'd been beaten enough times, she divorced him and married Stacy Maston. She has Louis and little Ginny, Virginia. Louis, I guess Louis is going to the University of Maine too. Louis is a dancer. He danced in these ballets that the Bangor Ballet Association put on. And no, he's going to southern Maine because he's staying in Portland, so it must be southern Maine. And Ginny starts high school this year. There's 4 years between them, so they. And this has been a good marriage. Oh, that's Maurice when she was little. It was one of the Christmas cards. You can see the church and all. You see, the church at one time had stables for horses so that people who came in with a horse and buggy could tie their horses up underneath the shelter.
So that's the Orland Church?
Yeah, the Methodist Church was like that. That was before my time, but that's what they tell me, so I have to believe it. And that's Maurice again, when she was little. We had a lot of pictures of her. She was a cute little thing, pretty little thing. Oh, that's, yes. My mother and father celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary over at my house at Fish Point. And we had a picture taken of them with you and your father and me. So we had the 4 generations. And there they are when they were married back in 1918. Weren't they a good-looking couple?
I think so.
I just wish Vivian would smile more, but...
We got her once, though.
Yeah, we did. That was a pleasant surprise. And there she is again. Do you know notice the card, M. Vivian Soper. When she went to get her birth certificate in order to get Social Security, she found that no name had been registered for her, just female child of Charles and Harriet Soper. So, since she didn't like Maud, she had her name registered as Vivian Maud. Vivian M rather than M. Vivian. But I think they used to practice writing that beautiful. My grandfather Hutchins could, but I can't. Oh, and that's Josephine. That's probably the year that I graduated from high school. We were on the point anyway. It's up by the old house somewhere. Why it was taken, I don't know. But probably my brother was practicing his photography because he did take pictures of many different things, and then he had a dark room. He developed them. I've got some of his equipment down in the basement. I don't know enough about it to know how much there is or how valuable it is, but it's there anyway. I thought Charlie could look at it sometime, see what he thought about it. And I think that's why I had that one, because I think he took it to practice. Oh, and that was in normal school. The second year of normal school, our class, the second year students always had the yearbook, and our pictures were taken and put in that with something about us, because originally the normal school was a 2-year program. By the time I went there, it was a 3-year program, but you could opt for 2 years. So some people did, they'd go 2 years, then they could teach, then they'd go on and go to university and get their 4th year if they wanted to. Well, I went 3 years. I enjoyed down there. And that was my 2nd year. Let me see, 18, 19, 19, 20. I was 20 probably at that time. Long time ago. Oh, and that's my brother when he was a little boy. It's one of the school pictures. You can see he wasn't very old because there's a missing tooth there. But he was always a happy little boy. He had red hair like mine, freckles. My mother's genes were dominant. My poor father, I don't know how he got there, but
Did Mammy have red hair too?
yes.
She did?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she had red hair and freckles. Both her children had red hair and freckles.
But you had no children with red hair and freckles.
I had no children with red hair and freckles. I have no grandchildren with red hair and freckles. No great-grandchildren either. Well, who knows? They may come. And that's my brother in Paris Island, where he went for his Marine training. He joined the Marines, and he went there for his training. And that must be, oh yes, this is the letter that was written to my mother and father after he was killed. Because they always wrote good things about those who were, well, of course they were good if they gave their lives. And that's your father and uncle. Mm-hmm. And as usual, your uncle had a smile and your father tolerated it. He didn't like to have his picture taken like that, but every year his parents insisted. So he had to put up with it. But he got better as time went on. See, his hair doesn't look so curly there. He did sort of straighten out a little, so. But when he was little, every time he saw me coming with a brush, he ran. I got my exercise in him. I think they were probably 3 and 6, because Johnny doesn't look very old, and he has had his hair cut. They were handsome children. Oh, and there's Susie. Mm-hmm. Susie didn't mind having a picture taken, but she didn't like that red dress. She hated that red dress. She didn't like red at all, and I always loved red. She and Charlie had the curly hair, and Johnny had the straight hair. But Johnny, as I say, was his father's child. She must have been 1st grade then, maybe 2nd grade. Oh, and she was I think that was the year she was in the 8th grade. She'd had her hair done, and she looked pretty nice there. And this was taken in the old house before it was made over. At that time, there were 2 bedrooms here. And the living room, this is the living room in this part, with a fireplace up here. And there was a passageway from here to the kitchen. But my mother had it all made into one big room eventually. That's my mother, my grandmother, and that is I, and my Charles and my John. Johnny was, let me see, he was about 6 months old when that was taken. And Charlie was almost 4. I think it was taken in March, and Charlie would have been 4 in April. And Johnny, September to March is about, 6 months, probably 7 months. He was a fat little baby. See, and Charlie's wearing the sweater I made. Oh, and we had that taken the fall we were married. And that dress I'm wearing is the one that I bought to be married in. But then Frances said, oh, you ought to be married in the church, and because she always wanted to, and she wasn't. So she had a white dress, long white dress that she had for the star. So she lent me that, and my mother bought a veil, so I was married in the church and wore white instead of. Well, I'd wanted to be married in the orchard down at the old place, but the end of September is kind of cold for that, so we were married in the church. And she lent me the dress. Then she came down and took some pictures of me. So I have some of these pictures that she took. that was 60 years ago this fall. Doesn't seem possible. Oh, that was Florida. Remember that? That was Fred. That must have been one of the first times, because Johnny was still at home. There's your mother and you and Susie, and my mother went with us too. So that was the whole family that winter. See, Fred was having a good time. Charlie must have been taking the picture. You look at, I had the dark rimmed glasses then too. Huh. I was trying to think, we were having a picnic because it's on the beach somewhere. I don't know where. But anyway, it was fun. We had a good time there. And Fred with his pipe, that was his trademark.
And his candy. He always had candy.
Yeah.
It was coffee candy or butterscotch candy or...
Yeah, it was coffee.
Coffee. Yeah.
I was trying to think what the whorehounds, I think. On that, it's Paul, when he was walking, so probably he was a year and a half, maybe 2 years old. Susie's little boy. Susie, they still are living in Bath. Because they bought the house when Ruth was about a year and a half. And they've been living there ever since. So Paul and Jamie were born while they were living there. He was a cunning little baby. Now he's 6 feet. 2, I think, 6. And that's Ruthie when she was little. She was the sweetest little. You see, she's wearing overalls, and I made those overalls for her. I don't know how her father let her wear them, but he did. But then she reached the point where she wore only skirts. And that was one thing that the children teased her about when she did go to elementary school. They all wore shorts when they went to head gym. Not Ruth, she was. So I think that was one of the reasons that they decided to homeschool the children, because they had different beliefs from what the community had. Oh, and that's my Fred with his 2 sons. Look at Johnny. Johnny was a Cub Scout and Charlie was a Scout. Charlie never did get to be an Eagle. He got to be Life Scout, but went to high school and girls became more important than scouting. And he always had a girl. Well, I think Johnny did too, but Johnny finished his requirements for Eagle Scout when he was in the 8th grade, before he went to high school, got too involved with girls. And that's Susie, again, one of the school pictures. I don't remember which number it was. If these children just open their mouths so I can count their teeth. Oh, and this is the one at the anniversary. I thought that was so sweet. And there's a picture of you reaching up to take something off the table, and I think your mother was not letting you do it.
I think I remember that picture.
Gee, that was so sweet. That was at our house in Fish Point. And I made that dress, incidentally.
That's beautiful.
I was so proud of it.
I like your pearls, too.
Yes, I like those too. I think they're long gone. I have a habit of breaking things. Oh, that's Herbert Soper in the Army. He was in the cavalry, but he got the cleaning up bit of the cavalry. I can't remember where that, one of the Army forts, but I don't remember which it was. Herbert was a cousin of my grandparents, of my parents rather. A cousin of my mother. Because he was a Soper. And his, you see, Herbert and Norman and Joe. There were 3 boys that Uncle Bob was father of. And when Ted, the youngest one, was born, their mother died. So my grandmother had Ted for a while. And I know, but Herbert was down there for a while too. But the great-grandmother, my great-grandmother, that grandmother had Joe, brought Joe up. And I think Herbert and Ted were down here with my grandparents, but then I guess they went back to their grandparents. I can't remember. I wasn't around, so I don't remember. But that was Herbert. He was the middle boy. Joe found an eagle that had been I don't know if it's been shot or what it was. So I took a picture of it. The wing spread was...
It's huge.
Yeah, it is. This is David Soper.
On the right.
And that's Joe in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember who that is. Oh, it looks as though it might be Teddy, one of the other Soper boys. Did you see the bald head?
Yeah. Yeah, we wondered if they were hunting eagles or how
No,
that came
they
about.
weren't.
But
I think they found it dead for some reason. I can't remember now what that was, but you see it was in the winter.
mm-hmm.
Someone may have shot it. People do things like that. Oh, and these are, it's Soper, Don Soper. And this is Thelma and Jenny, 3 children who were Joe's children, Joe Soper's children, I think. Well, and this is Herbert and Norman up to the old house. And that was Old Yeller, their dog. Yeah, they must have been, that was when they were being taken care of by their grandparents. That's the old house up to the falls. See the little windows, just plain. That house had tile around the fireplace that came from England. I don't know why, but they did anyway. And then when they tore the house down, whoever tore it down didn't appreciate those, so somewhere they've gone. And this is Susie's wedding. Do you remember? There you are.
Yeah, I do.
And this was whoever stood up with him. And Susie and Dick and his parents. And she has osteoporosis now.
Oh, does she?
But she's
Mom.
doing very well with it. Now this is Dorothy. This is Uncle Bob's child by his second wife. I think it was only his second. Anyway, Aunt Alice was this child's mother. And Dorothy married a minister who went to California, so they lived in California. They had children, but I don't know anything about them. And I never met her, but that's who she is. And this is Aunt Alice, Bob's wife. They never lived here, I don't think, very long. She went to a place in Brattleboro, Vermont, and he'd go up and stay with her in winters, then come back here in the summer. I don't know what the problem was. I guess she didn't like me. Maybe she didn't like the Sopers, I don't know. But anyway, that's what happened. And that's Uncle Bob with Dudley. They had Dudley and Dorothy. And Dudley married, but not very happily. I don't think he had any children either. Anyway, Dudley died just within the last few years, just buried up here in the old cemetery. And those two are Cheryl's 2 children. Aaron and what is his name? It's another odd name too. Well, it's Sharon Soper McGraw's 2 children, a little girl and a little boy. And that's Margaret Soper Harriman. She was Norman's daughter. And she married Bob Harriman, who was they went to school together in Farmington. And then they both got jobs over here. She taught in the elementary school and he taught in the high school, English teacher for a long time. But he's dead now and she's living up in the falls, up at the falls, not in the falls.
And they're Kathy Harriman's parents.
She's Kathy Harriman and Bobby. They had 2. Yeah, Kathy. Kathy was the older, and then Bobby. And Bobby's living up the falls now. In fact, he married a child that I had in the 5th grade in Bucksport. And they have 2 children. Oh, that is my great-grandfather, Gilbert Lafayette Snowman. And he had a very good business in Brewer, but what must have had something to do with caulking, because whatever it was, his lungs became infected, and he died at 41, just when my grandmother was 9 months old, leaving my great-grandmother with 8 children to raise. He had a partner who was not a very good partner, because the partner took all the business, all the money, and left her with nothing. So she came down to Penobscot, where her family was. and brought up her children. I don't know what she lived on, but she survived. She was a survivor. And their children grew up to be worthwhile children. My grandmother was the youngest, and Aunt Cal was the oldest. She and Uncle Bert had the brickyard across the river next to Eric's, I told you. And they were well off. In fact, when he died, he left $25,000. And that was such a tremendous amount at that time. 25,000? Look, what's 25,000? It's nothing. And this is his wife, Sophronia Leach Snowman. She was a tremendous survivor because she was left with 8 children, and 5 of those were boys to bring up. And bringing up boys in Brewer was not easy. That was her reason, part of her reason for going back to Penobscot, because she thought it was a safer place to bring up, and she had her family, her parents and brothers to help her. So they grew up very, very well. And you know, she died in 1911. Well, Uncle Frank always felt guilty because he had taken the horse and sleigh, I guess, to move her from Aunt Cal's up to one of her other children. And she got pneumonia. And he always felt it was his fault. He was just young enough to feel it was his fault that she got pneumonia and died. But it wasn't. It was just that she was old, she was tired, and she would have, if it hadn't been that, it would have been something else. But she was a tremendous person. My mother said that when she was staying here with my grandmother, they all loved having her come. On Sunday afternoon, she'd get the Bible out and read to them. So they enjoyed, that's how they learned what they knew about the Bible, because they didn't get to Sunday school in our church, that they were down here. But she was a devout person, a good person. And there she is again in the middle with, on the right end is her grandson, Dr. Gilbert Snowman. No, Dr. Gilbert Hutchins, because he was a son of Aunt Cal and Uncle Bert Hutchins. And this is his daughter, Florence, who died at a young age from, well, she died. And I think that's what it was. This is taken down the Castine Road, where, just that house just beyond Eric's, where they lived. And there she is again. That must be down there too. That one is Wilbury. Wilbury Hutchins was Aunt Cal's second son. Gilbert was the older, and then Wilbury. Wilbury was a lawyer and lived in Portland. He married I don't know, it was Russian, but she was a European girl anyway, Eastern. And somehow she was crippled. I don't know just what was wrong, but my mother said when they got up in the morning, she'd do everything that had to be done upstairs. Then she'd come down because she couldn't go up and downstairs very often. And I thought, what a good idea. Why did I do that? Well, because I can go up and downstairs, so I don't. But then she died, and they didn't have any children. And he married again. They didn't have any children, so he has no offspring. And, of course, Gilbert didn't because Florence died young, not married. But Rose, the one who would have carried the name, married a Moore, and she had twin boys who were not Moores, but she married him, so they got their name, Robert and Russell. Robert was lost in World War II in a flight from Italy or over Italy. He was in the Air Force, a lieutenant or something in the Air Force. And he was lost. They never did know where. Russell came back and lived. Russell had 2 daughters who were in California or somewhere out west. That wife was divorced. Then he married Priscilla, the one who makes the pies up here. They had 2 daughters, Claire and Rita, and they were divorced. Then he had at least one more wife anyway, but they had no children. But Claire and Rita live around here. They're different children. Oh, and this is Dr. Gilbert Hutchins' house in Camden. And at one time I went by it within the last few years, and it was being used for a family counseling or some health thing anyway. But the last time I came by, I didn't recognize it, so something's been done to it. And that's the daughter Florence, who never married and died young from anorexia. So as a result, there are no Hutchinses left. Well, actually, not my family either, because they're all Moreys. But I can't think of a better name. And that's her father, Dr. Gilbert Hutchins. He went to Bowdoin, graduated from Bowdoin. And I don't know where he went to medical school, but anyway, he practiced in Stonington, and then he went over to Camden and finished up over there. I think that's Lois, but I'm not sure. Yeah. Lois was Uncle Eb's daughter. Uncle Eb was married to Leela. He was one of my grandmother Sopa's brothers, and he and Uncle Will, the 2 brothers, went on vessels. Uncle Will is captain, Uncle Eb is cook, and they went. I think they were part of that triangle, you know, where what was it, liquor, molasses, and what was the other thing? There was a triangle at one time. I don't know, but I know they went down in the Caribbean in those, and they also came to Boston because we have some letters that they wrote from there. But anyway, she was Uncle Eb's oldest child, and then they had Louis, who was a cripple and died when he was 16, and they had Dot, who was a much younger. I think she was 18 years younger than Aunt Lois. And Dot just died last winter. Dot married once. That didn't take. So she got a divorce, and she never married again. But she worked down here in the store, you know, where...
Right, I think I recognize the name.
Yeah, she was working the store, and you all lived over the store, in the apartment over the store. In fact, she took care of Don when he was sick, took care of him until he died. And then when he died, he left her his trailer, which was down by and there she lived until she died. So she had a harsh outlook on life. Everything was dark, nothing bright and cheery. And that's Aunt Lois again, out in front of the old house up here. She and my mother were so closely of the same age that they were together frequently. Now that's one of the children I don't know. I mean, the name is there, but I never did meet him.
Lawrence Bridges, son of Addie, I think Adelaide Clements, and Sidney Bridges, Penobscot, Maine.
Well, I think then his grandmother must have been Rose Snowman, a sister, older sister to my grandmother Sopa, because I'm quite sure that Rose was married to a Clement in the Penobscot, and so he must have been her grandson. And I never knew Rose because she died before I was born. She was one of the older ones, and I don't know how they came. I've often tried to remember, figure out how they came in line, because I didn't know. There was an Uncle Frank, too, that built a house, I guess I told you, on $1 a day, or $1 a week or something. Anyway, he was very little, but he built a house and brought his family there. Now, I don't know any of his children, if he had children. I don't know. but that Rose must have been his grandmother, and I never knew him. But well, now isn't that the same boy with his sister? That must be there too, I think.
Let's see. Lawrence and Adeline Bridges, children of Addie Clements Bridges.
Yeah, and Addie Clements would have been the daughter of Rose Clements. Yeah. Oh, and that's my mother, my Uncle Frank, and my grandmother. Hey, my mother was actually smiling.
Yes, she was.
Yeah.
Do you know what she has in her hand? Looked like a little animal or something.
Probably a
A
kitten.
little duck or I don't know what.
Yeah, I don't know what that was.
Hmm.
I don't know. There's the old barn.
No.
I'm glad to see that. It was quite a barn in its day. Well, he had 12 cattle. That was a lot to have at that time. And all that field was clear. This was all cleared all here. Times have changed. Oh, and this is Uncle Lou with his car. He was a rural route mailman. And this Uncle Lou with his and Aunt Edie, that's their wife. I don't know what kind of car it was, but he was pretty proud of that. They didn't have any children, so they adopted a boy, brought him up. And his children were their grandchildren. They loved him. That's Uncle Lou when he was older, as you can see, beside his house in Penobscot. And there's Uncle Lou and Aunt Edie again. She was one of the homeliest women I ever saw, but one of the nicest. And they loved that son that they didn't have, that they brought up. What was his name? Leach. Dwight Leach. Dwight and Irma. Irma was his wife. And they had 4 or 5 children. And there they are again, Aunt Edie and Uncle Lou. I don't know where that is, but and that's their house in Penobscot. It doesn't look like that now. I don't even remember the porch on the front, but it probably was there. I don't remember all those buildings back there, because by the time he got old, many of them had deteriorated, and Dwight was not a builder-upper. And that's Dwight's family. And I know Robert. And let me see, there was Robert and Rose. Oh, I can't. Esther was one, Esther. And I can't remember the other 2 girls. But they had 4 girls and 1 boy. And that is, oh yeah, that is my father behind there with arm around Irma. This was Dwight's wife, Irma. My grandmother didn't approve. My mother didn't approve. And that's Uncle Lou. Oh, that was funny. My father was full of vim and vinegar. And that's Robert when he was in the service. Robert Leach. And that, I think that's Esther, but I'm not sure. It's one of those, it's one of those.
Rose Elaine.
It's Rose, okay. Then Esther must have been the oldest one. I never could remember which one. And there was Rose and Esther, but I don't know. Oh, and this is your grandfather and I, and your great-grandmother. Down on, that was on his aunt's porch, the house above where they lived.
Oh, okay.
That was this summer before we were married in September. He had just got home from the service with skinnies a rail. But I took care of that.
And her name's Fanny, right?
Fanny. Mm-hmm. Fanny Thompson Morey. And that's a little red schoolhouse where my grandmother Soper went to school, and where I did my rural training, teacher training. That was kept by the normal school as a training center for rural teachers going to the rural schools. It's gone now. And that's the backyard of your Morey grandparents down in Castine. That's another one. He went through here up to the corner to the McKinnons. The McKinnons were cousins of Fred. Mrs. McKinnon was sister to Fred's mother, Aunt Lou and Fanny. Fanny had Fred living. She'd had 2 children, but Aunt Lou had, I think, 10. She made up for it. And I think Aunt Mattie had quite a number too. But that's the backyard of the Morey homestead in Castine. Oh, and that's your mother and father's wedding night. We all looked very happy, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
That was over in Louise's house.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she had the reception over there. And, oh, these are the Snowman girls. These were Uncle Will's children.
Mm-hmm.
Uncle Will was one of my grandmother Sopa's brothers. Uncle Will and Uncle Eb and Uncle Frank and. But anyway, you see, beginning from the left, this is Wilma. Wilma was a twin. She had a twin brother, Willie. This is Hattie. This is Ethel, Ines, and Bernice. I was trying to think. Wilma was the mother of the woman we saw this morning. Ines, Wilma and Ines married brothers. They were Brays. She had Archie Bray and she had Joe Bray. And this Frances Bray that lives down here was her daughter, and Eddie McGuire, who was our funeral director, was her grandson. And every day when we go over to the senior citizens, her daughter Jean comes. Jean is, 87, going to be 88. Oh, these people must be all over 100. But that were the 5 daughters that Uncle Will had. In fact, I think he had 6 daughters, because no, wait a minute. Yes, he had more he had 8. Because there were Carrie and, there was one other one. Carrie and, I guess they were the oldest ones. And they died a long time ago. Oh, and that is Susie and Mammy with Ruth and me.
And that is Susie.
Yeah, that's one that your father took when we were in Florida. Not Florida, but Georgia. And that's one of John in Georgia. And that's your grandfather in Georgia. And that's your grandmother. We were a happy group. And that's my grandmother. I always liked that picture of her. See, that door is no longer that's at the old house in the L. And at that time there was a front door in the L, but it's not there anymore. Johnny took it out. Didn't need two doors in the L. But they had one coming out the front, and they had one going out the back to go to the barns and sheds and so forth. But Johnny didn't need to. She was a beautiful woman, I think. Of course, I never knew her, but